because I hinted at it in that video, but you actually are a war criminal now.
I know.
You are actually a war criminal.
I know I
I
am.
can't get over this.
I know. I've broken the Geneva Convention. I've violated the most sacred of all the conventions for human rights.
Do you know, this is going to be like one of my favorite achievements in life. Now, this is one of my best achievements that together with you, more you than me, we have violated the Geneva Convention.
It's not really anything to be proud of, mate. We're not joining a list of particularly likable people, are we?
A hallowed list.
A hallowed list of all the great men in the world who violated other people's human rights. Great.
So
perhaps we should explain.
People. Yes, exactly. They might be a little bit confused. So why don't you explain?
Okay. Well, for a very long time, if you called in paramedics, they would arrive in an ambulance, like so. Here they are. And on the front of the ambulance, there was, can you remember, a red cross.
Oh, there was a little red cross.
A little red cross.
The universal symbol for medical.
Yes,
medical health.
Yes, and there was also one on the back of the paramedic's backpack as well. And of course, the Red Cross, it's, I believe, it is a shorthand for healthcare and medical. It's been used in the video game industry on health packs and buildings and everything, for as long as I can remember, and it obviously has been in use for a very long time because it's the Swiss flag as well, so it has a long history to it.
It's not the Swiss flag.
It is the Swiss. It's not the Swiss flag.
It's not the Swiss flag.
It's on the Swiss flag.
It's not the Swiss flag. It's a white flag on a red background.
A white flag on a white. Yeah, all right. Well, that's very similar though, isn't it? That's just an inversion of the colours you're saying. Rather than a red cross on a white background. You're saying that theirs is a red background with a white cross. So at some point, I'm not entirely sure when, the Red Cross had added to the Geneva Convention that the symbol of the Red Cross on a white background and the white cross on a red background would be added to the Geneva Convention and therefore protected. And this is not like a trademark violation. This is like far, far worse. This is because it's actually a crime against the Geneva Convention to misuse the sign of the Red Cross in a game.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. Well, to use it in any context other than that authorised by the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Yeah.
So it's just it's astonishing.
So we got
astonishing.
Well, I think the reason for it, and the reason is very sound. I think the reason is that they don't want it to be misused in.
You've mellowed.
Yes, I have mellowed. I have mellowed.
When I told you about this, you were apoplectic with rage.
I was. I did have a little bit of a rant, I'm afraid to say, that the Red Cross was just going after indie video game developers because they had nothing better to do in the world.
Mate, I agree with you.
Well,
I actually agree with you on this. I agree with you. I think that what I think is that I understand that the mentality, it's not just the Red Cross, right? It's the Red Crescent and is there another one? I can't remember.
There's another one, which is like a red diamond that no one's ever seen.
Yeah. They're symbols that in war are supposed to signify that this is a civilian health centre or ambulance or evacuation or something along those lines. So you should not be attacking us, right? Attacking us is not going to further your militaristic aims.
Yeah.
And it completely makes sense in that context, I think. But on an ambulance or a med pack or a health pack in a video game, I kind of thinking to myself, is this really causing confusion? Is this really diluting that? Are people going to be going in, out in, I don't know, Syria or wherever there's a terrible conflict? Oh, look at that. It's a Red Cross. That must be a health pack from Call of Duty.
I don't know.
I don't think so.
There must be a whole division out there that are doing this, wasn't there? Trying to solve this problem, in video games. I think that they've been clamping down on video games. I think that the Red Cross also issued a statement a while ago, I'm not sure when, but stating that they believe that players should be prosecuted for war crimes in games.
Really?
Yes.
Really? Are you sure? No, post-truth, that's bullshit, man.
No.
Bollocks.
No,
No, I don't believe you.
Prosecuted in game. I don't mean in real life. I mean,
Oh, okay.
they were saying that your game character should not be able to get away with acts that would break the Geneva Convention without subsequent punishment.
Okay.
Red Cross statement: war crimes, video games. Do you believe me now?
Oh, I'm waiting for it to pop up.
The Red Cross wants virtual war crimes punished in video games. So in other words, if you're playing a game like Call of Duty or something, and you've taken the bunker, and the Germans all surrender, and then you shoot all the Germans, because when you shoot the Germans, they drop ammo packs, and you're low on ammo.
Yeah, right.
That's a war crime, and then your character should be dragged to The Hague, and then ultimately hung or something.
Right.
In game. I think that. Obviously, I think they haven't got a chance in high hell, but it helps to explain their mentality of what they're trying to say, doesn't it?
I think they've sort of misunderstood a little bit as well about what games are about. You don't get traffic violations.
Yeah.
In Grand Theft Auto. Yeah.
There's
a degree of fantasy here, but we should say as well that the letter from the Red Cross, its legal team to us, was one of the most gently worded and sort of apologetic and helpful
threats
letters.
Of jail time that we've ever received.
Well, it was, but normally the letters that you get are cease and desist immediately, or we will take extraordinary action without prejudice. All of this nonsense. But it said, to the creators, we're not sure whether you're aware of the fact that you might be in violation, so we're just bringing this to your attention. And of course, as soon as we saw that, fair enough. We don't want to mess with the Red Cross. But then all of your power went down, mate. And I genuinely thought that the Red Cross Tactical Squad.
Yeah, that's right.
Was,
I had a power
coming in to arrest
power
you.
cut like an hour later, didn't I? It's such a weird coincidence. I thought they were coming to get me or something. Yeah, I think
that's right. They're going to drag you off to The Hague.
I guess their thinking is that they want the symbol's usage to be clear and unambiguous. So I suppose it wouldn't surprise me. If you were special forces, right, and you were behind enemy lines, would you paint red crosses on your vehicles? Because that would be one heck of a cover, wouldn't it? So I guess what they're trying to say is that they really don't want that kind of thing happening. You don't want the Red Cross being used in deception, in military deception. But in all fairness, are you really going to arrest, the SAS or something when they get home?
Yeah,
because they put a Red Cross on the side of their van that didn't even exist?
Yes, you are. That's the point of it. Right? The whole point of it is that, yes, indeed you are. Because what you're going to say is the UK was held to be in violation of the Geneva Convention here. And the Geneva Convention was a very important piece of legislation or treaty that says we accept that there will be war, but can we just lay down a few standards that we all agree we don't want to cross, chemical weapons, for instance.
Yeah.
So none of the, certainly the UK doesn't have a chemical weapons program, so it has a protection program to protect its troops. And so it has chemical weapons to use for testing purposes internally, but we don't have any chemical weapons. As far as I'm aware, the US don't have any battlefield chemical weapons because I might be completely wrong. They used Agent Orange in Vietnam, didn't they? And I don't know anyone. I'm off my area of expertise, but the point of it, the point of the Geneva Convention is to say, these are the rule sets, and in theory, if UK special forces were found to be abusing that, there should be the UK should be held to account.
Yes, but I wonder if that's practical though. I wonder if that's actually reality, or if actually all the Red Cross can actually do is go after indie video game developers and get them to remove the Red Crosses from the sprite banks.
Thing, right? This is the problem, right? Because if you're a charity like the Red Cross, who should be doing wonderful things in the world, is it easy to start picking off soft targets and spending money, going, well, this is an encroachment on this symbol which we need to preserve, and so we need to stop it. And suddenly the Red Cross, I'm not saying this is happening, but even that one guy, whoever he is, volunteering, is not packing ration packs and things to be dropped for people in Aleppo. That's one less pair of arms to be helping in something serious. Because
they can't, but they can't help in some of these incredible war zones because it's just too dangerous.
Well, I would say to you, if I was organising the Red Cross, there's a certain amount of resources that I'm going to have, and I'm not sure that I want to devote any of my resources whatsoever to protecting my Red Cross in video games.
Well, maybe it's more like I do think it's ridiculous to enforce it because the Red Cross on our ambulance was sort of like 5 pixels across, and it's never confused anybody. But I think that other video games have probably abused the Red Cross symbol far more. So like particularly nasty, violent video games that use the Red Cross on health packs, for example. In those cases, the health pack is a power-up that powers up your character and allows them to carry on murdering, And it's a much bigger use of the symbol. Do you know what I mean?
Perhaps that would be their argument.
Yeah,
perhaps their argument.
And we're just on the edge, so that they haven't bothered to draw the line. I don't know. Prison Architect's a big successful game, so we're not really on the fringe. We've got like 2 million players that are seeing this misuse of the Red Cross symbol.
In ambulances carrying sick prisoners away and paramedics helping people.
God, So they very politely suggested a set of alternative symbols that no one has ever seen ever, didn't they? Like the medical symbol of the sort of, what is it? It's like a sort of
daggers in the snake.
The daggers in the snake with a snake coiled around it and stuff. Yeah. So we changed it to a green cross, which seemed to be a reasonable compromise. But it's just it's a funny old game, isn't it? It's an odd world. It's an odd world that we live in. That's the thing that we got threatened by.
So in terms of interesting and odd worlds, we enjoyed some thoughtful and well-created criticism again recently.
Yes. Shall I find it?
I like
Where
thoughtful.
Was it? It was,
yes, you find it. I like thoughtful and well-created criticism.
Here we go. Vice. Prison Architect has no room for political action. It was a lovely article, wasn't it? I know you get really excited, don't you, when people have serious discussions about serious world issues around Prison Architect.
Do you know, I really do, because that was my goal, right? My goal, obviously, is to entertain and to create a great game that everyone has lots of fun. But I think that if we can provoke a bit of debate about a real world issue and raise a bit of awareness, not in a like a serious way, we always said this at the start, we're not prison campaigners, I'm not desperate to change incarceration. It's just something that I'm interested in, and seeing articles like this is very provocative, and we have provoked this particular article, which I think is very helpful. Now, the main thrust of this article is that basically prisoners there is no mechanism within Prison Architect for the prisoners to go on strike. So
that's right.
If they're working and they're forced to work, and there's a correlation. The author, what's his name? Yusuf Cole. Yusuf Cole has watched 13th, which is a documentary put together recently about the 13th Amendment, and presents an argument regarding the use of prisons to perpetuate racism in the United States. And it's a little history lesson.
Particularly slave labor, racist slave labor, I think was the point of that, isn't it? Because America in particular has a history in that regard.
Well, the argument it makes is that the economy in the southern states was hugely based on the slave plantations and things. So when the emancipation occurred following the Civil War, suddenly the economy was just sort of taken away there. So who was going to be producing the work that previously had been done by slaves? And in order to fill that sort of economic vacuum, they started to use the prison service. And the reason it's called the 13th Amendment is the 13th Amendment says something like we're not going to allow anyone to be involved in slavery unless it's for criminal punishment.
I see.
So there's a little exception in there. So this is the argument. It's not my personal view.
There was a larger population. There was a skewed population of races in prison in America at the time.
Well, because a lot of them were still heavily racist, right? The police forces were heavily racist, some of them, I'm sure. So what was happening, and the legislative was still populated by racist individuals. So crimes like loitering, which is a ridiculous crime because it's just being outside, effectively.
Yeah.
Was disproportionately it affected black communities because they were the individuals who were being arrested and sent to prison. And now, what does the 13th Amendment allow? Well, it allows for labour within prison. So somebody would be stood on the street corner, arrested for loitering, sent to prison for a long time, and forced to create number plates or whatever. Now, the other thing.
Slave labor
that occurred.
Carrying on. So they legalized slave labor carrying on, and they made sure it affected African Americans more than other races. That's what the film alludes to.
To start off with, and it goes forward because it talks about the involvement of big corporations in prison labor as well. Because it comes, I mean, on the flip side of that, it was something that I was quite attracted to, the idea that actually prisoners can sort of financially pay back some of the damage that they've done. And I believe in free markets, so you would consider me a sort of Republican in that regard. So the idea being is that these prisoners could be stitching, I don't know, suits or something, which are then sold in some big American supermarket or whatever. There's value being added to the economy. But of course, the converse argument there is that no, all that happens is that the big chain corporations just enjoy the very, very cheap labor. There's no real value going back to the prisoners. And so the argument that Yusuf Cole is making is that we have dropped an enormous brick by not allowing our prisoners to rebel against that
to
work
refuse to work.
But let's talk about why that is not quite the case.
Yeah. Well, it's not. No, exactly. It's not quite the case. I mean, prisoners. There's something in the game that's encoded deep, and it's an assumption deep in the logic of the game that prison labour for the prisoners is optional in Prison Architect. Yeah. And it is. Your prisoners. I've got nothing to look at there. Your prisoners. If you open a work program, your prisoners who want to work will go and do it, and they'll earn money for working. And a lot of prisoners don't work. A lot of prisoners, for various different reasons, do not work. So he makes the accusation that it's completely binary in Prison Architect. They either work as if they're slaves, or there's a full-scale riot in your prison, and there's nothing in between. That's his argument. Yeah. But what actually happens is, loads of your prisoners don't work. If your prisoners are really pissed off, if their needs are not being met, just like we were just talking about in the last alpha video, the last update video, if your prisoners' needs are not being met, they'll go and take care of that instead of working. And some other prisoner will take up the empty work slot that would have been theirs. If they're a gang member, they never work. Gang members never ever work for the industry in your prison because during all their free time, they're called up to duty by the gang leaders and the lieutenants, and they're given jobs to do that further the gang's aims within the prison. So that you can't get gang members to work. It just doesn't happen. If they are enrolled in a reform program, for example, a drug rehabilitation program or an education program or a training program of some kind that your prison is running, they won't work. They'll do that program instead. And so there's actually a whole spectrum of reasons why prisoners don't work when you open a work program. But there are so many prisoners in your prison that somebody else just takes the job. So if a prisoner decides not to work, there's 10 more prisoners that want to work. So you don't notice, right? So it's very interesting to me reading the article because I don't know how much he played of the game. I can't remember if he said in the article, but he clearly didn't notice that prisoners were choosing not to work. Because one of the things that I think Prison Architect does do very well is put you in the shoes of somebody who's in charge of a large bureaucratic system that doesn't really have time for the individual and only really looks at the population as a whole. And when you're looking at the population as a whole, as a bureaucratic leader, you don't really see individual people not doing stuff or doing stuff, So he didn't notice that prisoners were choosing not to do work. And he assumed that it was just slave labour. But the reality is there is no button in the game that you can click on that forces your prisoners to work. Right? There's no slave labour button. There's no button. And it's an interesting idea to give the player that choice. To say, well, if you've, maybe you want to force your prisoners to work. They have no choice on the matter. Now, I've never done it because there's no need. You never have a shortage of prisoners who want to work. So having a slave labour button would seem completely unnecessary in the game. So that I think is like a key difference, and I think that reflects something in us as the creators of the game, that we made work an option for prisoners. Don't you think?
Well, I think, yeah, I do. I really do. I mean, I was just sort of scanning over his article again, and he says Introversion completely ignore the historical connection to slavery. Yes, we did completely ignore it because I didn't know about it.
He's right about that. He's right about that. Because we use the word slavery, and we mean something different to what he means by the word slavery, don't we?
Yes, I think
specifically
so.
African American slavery in America.
That's right.
Whereas when we say the word slavery, we're referring to the global concept of slavery and all its various forms and various different ways that it can occur. And so we have to be careful. Even saying the word slavery, somebody who's listening to us speak might hear something different than what we meant.
That's
so
right.
He's pointing out a specific American issue with slave labor in prisons that reflects to their history.
Yes.
And when we say slave labor, we mean labor with no pay. Right. So if I was to say slave labor in your prison would mean giving your prisoner zero wage, but but he's referring to it in the race context of slavery.
Well, and of course we had slavery in the UK. We can't say that we didn't, but just for, we got rid of it a lot earlier, and it's not quite in the national consciousness, I think, in the same way it is for our American cousins. But I think for me, this article really brought home the fact that our entire efforts have been completely futile and wasted. Right? I've realised during this project that what we wanted to do at the start, what we set out to do, is to create the idea of this sort of mythical prison in the sky. The Platonic concept of a prison, divorced from a society around it. I realised that actually is not possible. The prison system in a nation is a reflection of that nation and the society around it.
Absolutely.
And this is where the criticism has been levied for us, because there are so many points in prison architecture that you can look at through a national lens and say, well, you've not dealt with this.
You can say that's completely unreasonable, that it's such a liberal lefty view that all your prisoners are just going to work because they want to. That's a ridiculous view. That completely negates a factor of major corporations employing huge numbers of prisoners on ultra cheap labor in order to get commercial capitalist advantage, and the complete lack of any real benefit to the prisoners. They're doing the most menial labor possible. They're not doing anything fancy. They're not getting any kind of, we stick to the idea that they come out better if they've been employed in your prison because they've gained qualifications.
Well, I believe in that, right? I don't think it's binary. I really don't think it's binary. I think that there's a sliding scale here, right? So
yes.
I genuinely believe that if you are educated, if you go into prison and you can't read or write, that is going to have an effect on you, on how you perceive yourself within the world. If you come out of prison being able to read and write, then I think that's going to change you a little bit, right? I think it's going to help. Yeah. And I think the same is true with working. I mean, I know that there are prisoners who enjoy working because it gets rid of the monotony. Prison is a bit of a unpleasant thing, really, locking up a human being for a long period of time. So breaking the monotony, I think there's a benefit there, and I think there's also a benefit from somebody feeling like I've actually done a good day's work. I've done something that I'm proud of. I've learned to be a tailor in here, and I've made these trousers or whatever. So I think that there's real benefit there. However, it can swing too far, right? It can, and it did. And I think the issue here is that right at the start, pretty much, of the sort of expansion of incarceration in the US, the prison labor system was abused and went too far the wrong way. Yeah. And I think that. But I think it would be dangerous to say that prison labor is completely wrong, right? We don't want any prison labor at all. All prisoners should not have to do any labor.
Different sides of the political spectrum approach from a different angle, don't they? I mean, some people view prison labor and prison reform programs as different aspects of the same thing, which is the process of rebuilding the individual, so that when they come out the prison, they have some skills, some qualifications. They've learnt a work ethic, and they've repaid some of their loss, and they've earned some money at the same time. It's like. There's that reformist view that labour is good, and there's also the original concept of punitive labour. The idea of lifting a load of heavy bricks from one stack to another stack all day long, and then the next day moving them all back again. That doesn't really happen in the Western world anymore. I don't think any Western countries still have punitive labour, but that was so that you can see how it can come from both sides of the spectrum. But then there's the kind of the corporate interests in it of like, well, hang on, this is an incredible opportunity. We can get labour that's even cheaper than outsourcing to a foreign country here in our own country, and we'll get subsidised by the state, and we'll have all these advantages and everything. So it's very interesting that prison labour is like this thing that multiple people from all around the political spectrum all kind of agree on is a good idea, and all for different reasons. And all of them have been responsible for abusing it too much in their particular direction. I mean, so it's very so that the idea of a reformist program, like the idea you mentioned of tailoring and stuff. I mean, tailoring is very specialist and highly skilled, and I don't know how much tailoring really happens in prisons. The more skilled it is, the less of your prison population can do it. So it tends to be more menial manual labor, like stamping out number plates, operating machinery, or being involved in the kitchen, but involved in a menial way, like not like a chef, but more just like stick this slop in the cooker and press the on button type labor.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the problem is that all reform programs are expensive, but I've certainly seen. I know that there are restaurants that operate in prisons in the UK.
Yeah, sure.
You can go and
a few hundred inmates might be involved in that versus however tens of thousands of inmates actually exist. Not every prison can have a restaurant, and even if it did, only a fraction of the population will be able to work in it.
I don't know. I agree with you on that. I think every prison could have a restaurant if the program was proved to work, proved to be successful. I mean, the difficulty is that prisoners are lost people, right? It's not a vote winner saying we're going to improve the quality of life for prisoners, because in general, most people, just don't care, because you're taking money from a health service, aren't you, or defence or policing or something like that.
It's a zero-sum game. You've got to turn a tax up or some other social program down in order to pay for prisons, haven't you?
A legitimate argument would be that if you can reduce offending rates, then that's going to make communities safer. I think in the UK, there's a space issue here, just a physical space issue. I mean, America locks up a huge number of people. But the reason it's able to do that is because land is very cheap, whereas in the UK, land is very expensive, right? So our prisons...
We've got a lot less of it, haven't we?
Yeah.
Some of our prisons are
all overcrowded.
Major cities and stuff, aren't they? So
there's
no way they're going to be expanding.
No, they can't expand. They just can't afford it. So what's happening over here? It's interesting. What's happening over here is the opposite of what's happening in the States, right? All these things that look like a good idea, like minimum tariffs and 3 strikes and you're out. All of these programs that when I first heard about them kind of growing up sounded like, yeah, it's brilliant. We've never implemented them over here. And the reason is because we're sort of at capacity. It's like the other way around. It's like the UK is sort of involuntarily said we have a maximum prison population of X, right? Yes. And so the baddest guy... you have to do something badder than the baddest guy currently in prison to take his place. Yeah. It's like a different way around, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you showed me something that was a comparison of parole times, minimum served times. Right? So in America, it's quite common to give a sentence with no chance of early parole. Like that's a reasonably common occurrence, whereas in the UK, it's an incredibly rare occurrence.
Yeah.
Like, there are very few prisoners in the UK who have no chance of shortening their sentence. In fact, I can remember a political argument a while ago. I can't remember who it was that was involved in it, that they were suggesting that all prisoners could be offered the chance to halve their remaining sentence if they confessed to the crime very early in the process. Do you remember that process? So the idea was that at the time when you're arrested or the time when you're charged, if you confess, or if you confess on day one of your trial, because you save so much aggro, because you save the victim's aggro of going there, because you save all the lawyer money and everything, you will get... the judge will potentially award you half the sentence that you would have received. That could be a massive, massive reduction.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a huge backlash against this idea, wasn't it? Because it was this idea that, you could go in for a serious crime and you could get years and years knocked off just by confessing. And it rubs a lot of people up really the wrong way because they feel like they should be going to prison for 20 years, not 10. This idea of justice and retribution are very interconnected, And if the victims don't feel that justice has been done, or if they feel that the person got away too lightly, then that can have a very negative effect. But I think that there was a very practical reasoning behind this, right? That they were trying to find ways to cut down the prison population. And if you're just sending people away for 15 years, 20 years, over and over again, they're going to be there for a long time, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, plea bargaining is interesting. It's very different in the States and in the UK, and I'm not an expert at all. I think in the UK there are certain offences where it just doesn't happen, right? There's going to be a trial. You're not going to get a huge much of a reduction in your tariff. Whereas I think it's a lot more common in the States. But it's a.
Well, I think it didn't go through. It never got passed. I don't think because it has.
Oh no, it has. It definitely has.
Really? Well, this idea of halving your sentence.
Absolutely. In the UK, it's I'm not sure if it's quite half, but you get big sentence reductions if you plead guilty before trial. You get reductions all the way through if you plead guilty.
You can get further reductions if for good behaviour, can't you? Once you're in prison.
Well, I think I'm not Yeah, I'm not sure how that works. I think that's more that we have a functioning parole system in the UK where we're trying to get people out fairly swiftly, and I think that your parole is more likely to occur if you behave well. But these are things that I don't know anything about, and I've learned in the post-truth world to stop relying on vague notions that I have that are just completely
Yes.
untrue. You know,
I read
they're
an article
just
once.
prejudices. Yeah, exactly. I watched The Bill or something.
It's
Where
very
it brought
difficult.
this.
It's very, very difficult in the current world, isn't it, to be certain about things that you think you know about.
Well, and you can. It's interesting watching something like The 13th. It's a great documentary, and I recommend all of the thinking people out there to go and watch it. But it's only one side of the argument. You're watching it, but you're presented with a lot of very articulate people who have spent their lives thinking about this particular issue and presenting an argument for it. But they've got like one or two people in there showing the counter argument, but they're not as articulate. They haven't thought it through as well. Then they're not refuting the point. So the filmmaker makes them look a bit foolish, I think. And now in the modern world, that always just makes me raise an eyebrow a little bit. That makes me think, right, I understand that you've traced this thread through and you make a compelling argument for it. But I know, for instance, prison labour, all of the pressures, big corporate pressures exist in the UK that don't exist in the US. And on this issue of prisoner exploitation, I don't think we have a problem with it. So there's something else affecting the US system that they've not quite touched on in that documentary, because we've got prisoners, we've got corporate lobbying groups, we've got big corporate entities, but we don't have enormous corporations shutting down their prison labour wings. Over here. So why, right? What was it? It's not the system. It's not. There's this one. Arguments are made nowadays like the whole system is bent toward a particular type of operation. And I don't think that's a particularly helpful way of thinking. Because that implies some level of control at the top. That someone is controlling this whole system, when in fact it's not the case, right? What there are is many different interests and voices being heard, and looking at why is there not a check and balance in there? What would the check and balance need to be that would actually mean prison labour would serve the purpose that we'd like it to serve, as in reforming and giving people self-confidence and all the rest, but without going down this slippery slope of exploitative slave labour.
Yeah, well, it's probably very, very complex. I mean, it's a whole bunch of factors, isn't it? That it's not just the low wages or zero wages or tiny, tiny wages that are offered. When the article makes the point that I'd never heard of before, that they're actually taxed heavily when they get paid. They actually have to pay a lot of it back as taxes. Taxes are always there. And then when they go to the shops in the American prisons, everything is ridiculously expensive, like beyond what you would think would be reasonable,
Yeah.
So there's like a zero on the end of every price.
Yeah.
Because it's a corporation again that's providing the things that they can buy in the shops, and the corporation has added a huge markup to everything because it's serving them within a prison.
And that's
there's a whole additional level of logistics. So not only are they getting less money, they're being taxed more and having to pay more for even the most basic stuff.
But that's a great example of this. The idea that everything in the prison shops is too expensive for them to afford. It's corporations just exploiting prisoners. It is corporations exploiting prisoners, but actually it falls to the government that laid the procurement contract, right?
That's right.
And I started my career.
Corporations will do what they can do to maximize their profits,
right? But
within the law. So it's the law that's at fault in that case.
Exactly. It's the
contract that was done with them that was at fault.
That's right. Which is. And to be honest, it's probably very expensive to get stuff into prisons, safely and with all the checks in place. And I mean, if you were going to be a clerk selling, working in a shop, would you rather work in the corner of your block or in the prison? Right?
Yeah,
You'd rather work on the corner.
Well, you've just got a huge security issue as well, haven't you? You've got a whole other level of security to consider that you don't have to consider in a normal shop.
There's no competition either, right? So you're not got two competing firms. You've got a captive market. So, you can look at these things and you can understand why the economics is going to drive it in a particular direction. But it's not necessarily malevolent. It's the fact that because they're prisoners, there's not political will for there to have two shops in the prison, right? That would be enough. Yeah. Two shops in the prison run by two different companies
competing on prices
would suddenly fix your problem, right? But why have two when you can only have one? It's easier, and easier for the state means cheaper for the state or the government, whatever the government is, and that means more money that can be spent on healthcare,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So it's
Absolutely.
not necessarily malevolence. It's often incompetence, you know.
It's
But
yeah,
all of that
and
said,
it's companies behaving like companies. I mean, bringing it back
that's
to
right.
the original point of the article, which is that there'd been a series of strikes recently within prisons of prisoners, which I think is amazing, an amazing concept. Prisoners were so hacked off with their working conditions that they coordinated with other prisoners in other prisons and arranged to all go universally on strike and refuse to work within these prisons. Who knows what threats they faced as a result of that? You know, having their sentences, all the things we talked about. You know, all that good behaviour time that you've got, all that working towards your parole day, all those notes that we've been making about how well you've been behaving. We're just going to cross it all out and shred it because, you know, you're getting your maximum sentence. All your privileges are going away. You're going down to the crappiest meal a day. You're going to the heaviest security block. You're going to spend time in solitary. I mean, it's not like you have a union protecting you, is it? And you can stand outside, you know, around the picket fences, around the picket lines, and you know, you're in such a vulnerable position as a prisoner going on strike.
But then again, it comes back to there's a precedent for this in the US, right? The civil rights movement. And in the UK, I guess it's going to be something like the suffragettes, you know, voting for women's rights. Right? These were people who
you had everything to lose when you joined this.
Absolutely,
this
you're gonna get arrested. You know, you're gonna get arrested. You're gonna get beaten. You're gonna get thrown in prison. But you're fighting for something which is bigger than you that you care about. And you know, so that bravery we've seen time and time again. It would have been in the mills in Lancashire and all the rest of it in the Industrial Revolution in our country. You know, people would have been protesting for workers' rights. So it is very difficult for you and I to see because we come from, you know, privileged backgrounds where we've never had to band together with people similar to us to fight oppression. But, you know, anyway.